Hello, Berlin. Hello, Berlin. This is 88.4 FM and welcome Potsdam on 90.7. You're listening to Ricochet live on the air. Okay, so we're going to jump in. We're on page 87, chapter 3, exploring the germline of the Corinthian order. And there are a lot of illustrations up at the top of this section. So I'm going to read probably sort of one line, and then that one line will have taken us from page 78 to page 87. And we missed those illustrations in the last radio show, so I'm going to go back and explain them, and there's quite a lot of them. And if you've started from the beginning, which I would always recommend with any book, then you'll know what the audio cues are going to be, and you'll hear the sound for when I say something which is not in the text. So I'm going to describe all the visuals as I go along, and I'm going to contribute some of the ideas and revelations that have come to me in the last 4 years since it went to print. So if you want to read along, you can get the book through the Bandcamp, or you can get it through Antenna Books, which is the global distributor, and you can order from Lejar Forlag, my publisher for this project in Oslo. Shout out Lejar. Okay, so here we go. As has become increasingly clear, following the advent of antisocial media, the retelling of a story always leads to variants on the original. Okay, so as advertised, you haven't really had much of this to get into. Sorry to break the concentration that's not even formed. I'm going to describe the images now. So the image on page 80, I'll read the caption first. 3rd to 2nd millennium, Egyptian palm tree column and capital motif after Ibid Shilo. As this motif is recurrent among sites of burial and worship, I would agree with the hypothesis that the plant world has been evoked throughout human history as a symbol, not only of fertility and agricultural wisdom, but as a protective force in itself. Here is an ancient Egyptian expression of the sacred palm within its religious architecture, circa 3rd to 2nd millennium. You've got one of these kind of very beautifully pared down, rasterized images by Jorn Agard, who was the designer and artist that I collaborated with. And really you have a very sort of simple column with the palm fronds kind of all shooting directly upwards, and they sort of branch out as they will meet the weight that the column is supporting above. And you have a series of kind of horizontal lines beneath them, and then one might say a sort of protrusion dipping down with some small details that are sort of lost beneath those lines. On the opposite page, we have a really beautiful engraving. I'll read the caption. Protective flowers bloom at the ends of long, flexible stems that partially hide a figure on a cylinder of Urk after Ibid Dantin, figure 719. So here, I guess part of the mystery reveals itself a little bit. You have a figure that is attempting to sort of cloak itself in branches with blooming flowers at the ends of these kind of fronds or stems. To the left and to the right, you have animals. I think the theory is that they are kind of wild animals. Because the thesis which is being put forward by Tantin as far as I remember, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself with what comes on the next pages, but I think the theory is that the plants are also places where you hide, not only to hunt, but also when you are the prey of the animals around you in the ancient world. Following on to the next illustration, we have this really beautiful sort of pluck almost. I'll just read the caption quickly before trying to describe it. It's pretty abstract. Third millennium. Sometimes a conifer stands behind a seated shamash, here on a stele of Susa, after Ibid Dantin, figure 523. We also see what could be a reference to the tree of light, represented by the sun or star positioned above. So the caption kind of describes it fairly well. Shamash is this kind of repeated god that's going to play a recurrent role in the religious iconography of this period in the Fertile Crescent. And this character is sort of seated and has one of my favorite sets of symbolic representation in his hand. I'm pretty sure it's a he, this god. And the symbols are simply a circle and a stick. And of course, it's linear time and cyclical time operating concurrently, consecutively, really kind of giving the game away in many ways if you sort of delve into the spiritual thinking that I've been interested in to do with sort of non-local temporal existence, so sort of quantum stuff, but also deeply sort of spiritual experiences of timelessness and out-of-body experiences, which are recounted throughout the ages, but I'm not going to get too into that at the moment. In the middle of the sort of plaque is another sort of leafy object. I believe this is the conifer, which is being referred to. On the following page, this is a very unusual way to start the radio show, to be honest, with 5 different illustrations, but that's the spread we've arrived at. So this has got to be one of the most significant religious pieces of religious iconography, perhaps for the whole kind of research that's taken place. And the caption reads, however, in another artwork from the same period, the palm tree clearly plays a role, here as a gateway being pulled open for Shamash and 2 lower deities. Third millennium, Shamash appearing between 2 mountains, while lower gods open the gates to another realm, after Ibid Dantin, figure 689. Now, the significance of this was highlighted for me when I came across the 2 large palm tree sculptures that adorn the back of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, or Secret Service building, that was only really completed in 2017 in Berlin. So during the research period, I mean, sort of really handing off, as it were, because I started researching in 2018. And the correlation between the large palm trees and the research in the book was pretty obvious once I had made those discoveries or rediscoveries after Dantin's 1937 book, where he sort of lays all this out. But it only occurred to me later that the real significance is that there are 2, indeed, metallic palm tree sculptures. And so the opportunity to interpret that as a gateway remains open. The next image is another variation on sacred plant motifs, correlating with palm trees, but also other types of plant formation. And the caption reads, Ibid Shilo, page 26, quote, the origin and continuous use of this pattern are found from the 2nd millennium BCE on amongst the cultures of Syria, Palestine, and Mesopotamia, unquote. So this is essentially two figures, again, one to the left, one to the right, although they don't appear to be holding open any palm tree gateways to other realms. But they seem to be sort of in a sort of religious repose, perhaps. The figure on the left looks like he's wearing a sort of a hat and holding a staff. The figure on the right has got a sort of dome on the crest of their head, and the sort of tree motif, if you will, it's actually sort of more like a column by this point. In the middle has these sort of volutes at the bottom and the top, and several kind of levels or stages leading up to a more detailed frond as it sort of breaks the crest of the column. Like many, I'm deeply interested in the process of even the possibility of truth assertion in the year 2021. I began this process of research into origin narratives, partly due to the election of the 45th President of the United States and a sense of fascism mutating. It is also a response to the use of data manipulation, which played a part in that election, and the United Kingdom's referendum on leaving the European Union, which I explore in Chapter 5. The problem is that it has taken 4 years to complete. 45 is on the way out, and Brexit will occur in a few weeks from the time of writing. But problemizing truth in the wake of these events continues, as it will for the far right, who also have a stake in leading the geopolitical narrative to effect local change. Contradictions to my own truth claims are more than welcome, and according to the evidence collated by H. Danthien in his influential book, The Date Palm and Sacred Trees, 1937, the natural imagery employed in religious contexts in the 4th to 3rd millennium in the Fertile Crescent was in fact more commonly coniferous, which is to say, more like a Christmas tree than a palm. The pattern of sacred palms really begins to pick up in the archaeological evidence around the 3rd to 2nd millennia BCE. For Professor Yigal Shiloh, 1937 to 1987, of the Institute of Archaeology of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the 3rd millennium is the, quote, axiomatic point of departure, unquote, for evidence of the, quote, palm tree as a central religious motif, unquote. Footnote 5. The origin of and continuous use of this pattern are found from the 2nd millennium BCE on amongst the cultures of Syria, Palestine, and Mesopotamia. By this period, there have been numerous, presumably thousands and thousands, of background mutations in the expression of floral and tree motifs, such as the lotus, brackets figured in the temple to the Egyptian goddess and of midwifery, Hathor, close brackets, below, as well as the acacia and the cedar tree, to name but two others. The use of sacred trees in the capitals of supporting columns in religious architecture becomes more and more widespread further down the chronological timeline. The psychoactive properties of the lotus flower were known to the ancient Egyptians, thus supporting the idea that sites of sacred worship, where offerings to the gods are made to ensure prosperity and protection from malaise, have been tied up with access to alternate planes of reality for millennia. As the genealogy continues into the 2nd and 1st millennia, however, naturalistic emblems of a sacred biosphere enter into several new phases of representation. Okay, so I'm going to do another description of the illustration on page 88. We have here the lotus leaves described previously at the temple of Hathor, which is between the 3rd and 2nd millennium BCE. Essentially, this is a rasterized image showing the incredibly ornate carvings of lotus leaves, which could easily at a glance be taken for the acanthus leaves that we're going to get into in a little bit of the Corinthian column. I guess the most distinct difference is that you have faces on all kind of 4 directions of the column. I guess I would assume that is Hathor herself. Interestingly, this may be because of a cultural crossover between the reigning king of the Akkadian Empire between 2400 to 3300 BCE, Sargon the Great, and the Sumerians. The Sumerians hailed from the earliest known civilization, Sumer, and the expansion of the Akkadian Empire led to widespread bilingualism and, one might posit, other forms of cultural polyphony and cross-pollination. In the debate around the origins of the Garden of Paradise, it is also pertinent to note the genealogy of the word Eden, which is thought to have originated in the Sumerian dialect prior to adoption and adaptation into the word Edinu, meaning plain, during the cultural crossover with the Akkadians. Footnote 6. The term Eden probably is derived from the Akkadian word Edinu, borrowed from the Sumerian and Eden, meaning plain. Encyclopedia Britannica, entry on Garden of Eden 2020. For now, let me return to the archetype of the palm tree as a symbol of religious significance within the Fertile Crescent of the 2nd millennium BCE. Firstly, it appears that the palm tree really gains prominence as a tree of life or other sacred significance within the cultural expressions found in the Fertile Crescent during this period. It also becomes a more stylized simulation of a palm tree, as depicted on the opposite page. In this 2nd millennium BCE, cylinder seals, one finds further abstraction and 2 characters who are contemporary with the epic of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. The epic tale of Gilgamesh is the oldest surviving work of literature. Here, among other exploits, he and his friend Enkidu cut down a series of sacred cedar trees, thus breaking one of the strongest symbols of humankind's connection with the gods, an axis mundi in the form of the great tree of life. The significance of the slain cedar tree of Gilgamesh can be interpreted as a break with nature in 2 distinct and interrelated ways. In one sense, it is indicative of the final separation of humankind from the gods, who are only accessible through the axis mundi. On the other hand, this aspect of the myth, which has inspired infinite subsequent reinterpretations and retellings, can be seen to signal the departure from the primacy of nature's cycle itself. Given the emphasis on women as, quote, creatures of nature, unquote, as the mysterious bearers of life, and indeed sometimes the very landscape in toto, the symbolism of tree felling and dominance over nature can also be read as co-emergent with a long journey from the great goddess hypothesis to male exclusive mystery cults and different forms of patriarchy more widely. Though the myth is highly complex, I argue that its repeated retelling, its very replication in cultural history, has served to legitimate or explain away the story of patriarchy. Who will plough my vulva? Who will plough my high field? Who will plough my wet ground? By the early first millennium, the sacred tree can be evidenced to have transformed into forms which no longer explicitly reference anything vegetal at all, as the pot from Cyprus on the following page demonstrates. Other finds from Cyprus at this time indicate that the pots themselves were part of a religious ceremony of libation, where a drink is poured out in honor of a deity.